It's been a while, and really these have come back through popular demand. Lots of people have been asking where have the top 1000 vinyl videos gone, and they haven't really gone anywhere. A lot of it is down to the fact that really just other things took over, and they didn't prove to be quite as popular as some of my other videos. But you've been asking for them, so I've got a little change of venue here because it's winter now. It's cold outside, so I've got a nice log burning fire down there. But without further ado, I've been through the collection, and some of the stuff I've picked out, I've gone for a bit of a punky theme for this episode. Now, punk is not really the sort of music that I tend to really go for, so I've had to dig deep for some of these. But I found some. I couldn't actually find my copy of Nevermind the Bollocks by Sex Pistols. It's been misfiled, and given the number of records I've got, that could take a lot of finding. So I picked 3 others out today. And the first one up is Dury, New Boots and Panties. And this is actually a pretty great album there. I'll show you the back of that as well. Picture of it Dury. And it looks very homemade. And this was kind of a theme with the punk culture that was going on at the time. But to describe it as pure punk would be wrong. It was certainly born out of the punk era, but Dury had a lot of other influences. There's a lot of rock and roll ballads and a lot of pub songs as well. I was having a quick listen to this earlier on, and it did strike me that it was like, it's what would happen if you got Chaz and Dave slightly drunk and maybe spiked their drinks with a bit of speed. There's certainly that kind of pub song thing going on there, and it's actually really great to listen to. The album itself, it didn't really trouble the charts particularly, but it still managed to go platinum. That's selling more than 300,000 copies, and indeed is regarded generally as being Dury's finest album. Now, when people talk about Dury and the Blockheads, the Blockheads aren't really credited on this. In fact, 3 of their members never even played on this album, and as a group they kind of came together a little bit after this was recorded. But when you say Dury and the Blockheads, you probably think of things like Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick and Reasons to Be Cheerful Part 3, neither of which are on this album. But having a look through, and there's I think the only single that was on this, and this was quite common at the time, that you'd have non-album singles. So there were other tracks floating around which aren't on this album, but certainly Sweet Gene Vincent is the one and only single that was released from this, and it failed to chart. I think a lot about this album is that it was very much one of those slow burners, and people kind of came to appreciate it after its initial release period. Now, a few interesting things I've been looking up about this. Dury, he caught polio at the age of 7, and I'm led to believe that he had slightly weaker leg muscles as a result of this, but you wouldn't really know to look at him. And certainly from the videos and pictures I've seen of him prancing around at places like Chalk Farm at the Roundhouse in Camden, he certainly didn't let it hold him back. On this front cover picture, what's interesting is you can see a reflection of the other side of the road in the shop window. We've got Woolworths there, and this actually means that you can actually work out roughly exactly where this was taken, and it also allows the shop he stood in front of to be identified. This shop was Axford's, back when they had, this is about 1979, 78, something like that, they had a London branch. Now, it seems there that there's an awful lot of sort of tatty, nylon-y, cheap and nasty sort of underwear in there. But nowadays, Axford's very much focuses on its more specialist area, making corsets. You may recognise this from my blogs, and in my youth, I used to buy a fair few of these. In fact, oh dear, little interlude here, out of the packaging. So there we are. This is what Axfords are world famous for. They've been making these for hundreds of years. But enough about my little cyanide. God, that smells a bit fusty. It's been in there a long time. But certainly, this album is well worth indoctrinating into the top 1000. Also, one little thing before I forget, that's actually Baxter Dury. That's Ian Dury's son. And according to a bit of folklore, but no one's really quite certain about this, apparently he ran into shot. He wasn't supposed to be on the album, but he ran into shot and posed, strike a pose next to his dad. And when the film was developed, apparently there's only 4 out of maybe 24 shots that they took that he's actually on. And Ian Dury and the photographer both looked at each other and went, that's the one. The next album that I've picked out here, this is the debut album from The Specials, otherwise known as just The Specials by The Specials. This was produced by Elvis Costello. Came out, again, roughly about the same period as New Boots and Panties. And a lot of this is basically the beginning of the two-tone Coventry ska rude boy kind of period. And what's interesting is that a lot of the songs on this are actually tracks that were big in Jamaica about 15 years previously, and this was kind of reintroducing them into the UK market for a new audience. And a lot of these people, they grew up in communities where they were the children of the immigrants who'd come in from the Caribbean as part of the 1950s immigration drive, trying to get people come in, do jobs like bus drivers, working on British Railways as locomotive cleaners, things like that. So they grew up listening to a lot of this music, and certainly the outfits, the rude boy outfits with the pork pie hats and the mohair suits and the loafers, that's actually the kind of fashion that 15 years previously in Jamaica a lot of the people who felt disaffected with society would wear. So it's quite interesting that it's kind of fashion repeating itself. And the other thing about this was it was preaching social harmony. So you had black people from black communities mixed with the white people from the white communities. And this was something that really, certainly as you came into the Thatcher era, there was quite a political movement born out of this. And certainly some of the special songs that you'd be probably really familiar with. Well, off here, we've got A Message to You, Rudy, but things like Free Nelson Mandela, and I've been listening to that on YouTube. I don't actually have a copy, that came off their 3rd album, but it's a great song. And apparently it just went down so well in black South Africa at the time, because here were whites and blacks getting along just fine and dandy in the video. And, it's great to see, and certainly when you look at these old videos, it's sometimes easy to forget just how much social tension there was, even up to as late as the 1980s. Now, the final album that I've picked out is this. This is a group called Dead Kennedies. Again, we're looking at the same sort of period as the previous two. I believe, again, this is it's sort of one of the mid-period Dead Kennedys tracks. So we're looking at sort of early 1980s, so a little bit later than the other two, but certainly the group had been around since the similar sort of period. And this album, it kind of built on the sound that they developed. They kind of broke out of the San Francisco punk scene, and certainly back when they weren't at all well known, weren't really signed, weren't a big name group, they were invited to give some kind of sort of new wave credibility to a music award ceremony that was being held in, I think if I remember correctly, San Francisco. And they were supposed to play a particular track and, play it nice for all the hobnobbing of the bigwigs and that. And instead, they started playing the song that they'd rehearsed and that the record companies and, the bigwigs thought they were going to play. And then they stopped and then gave a bit of a speech and then changed their outfits a little bit and launched into another song, which was really a social commentary about the ills of the record industry and MTV type thing, that kind of thing. That particular song has never appeared on any of the Dead Kennedys albums, but certainly a version of it did turn up on, I think it was a live album. The story behind this album actually is quite interesting. I never set out to buy it. Back when I was a student in the mid-1990s, I used to go to a record shop. It's gone bust, disappeared now, called Concepts Records. and this was, they just moved from their first location to their second location. They subsequently went on to a third location, but at this second location they had a big rack behind the counter, and it was where when you ordered an album or a single or something, and there was a lot of students with some very varied interests, so it was a lot of weird and wacky music would pass through that place. They used to put it in this rack and it would sit there, and usually you'd pay something like a £3 deposit to secure that item. You'd order it, and then you get an email or a little note, actually, from what I remember. Used to come through the internal mail. I think there was in Durham, there was a place where people could dump these all into the internal mail, and they got distributed out amongst all the colleges and ended up in people's pigeonholes. Well, anyway, somebody had ordered this album a long time previously, probably not long after it came out, and they paid their deposit. It had sat on the shelf, and the person had never come back for it, probably graduated, gone, whatever. But I remember once, I used to get on quite well with Dave, I don't know what his surname was, the guy who owned Concepts Records, and I just asked him, what are those there? And he said, they're ones that people have ordered and never come back for. And at the time, vinyl was kind of dying a death in the mid-1990s. And this one in particular stood out because of its very kind of distinctive cover. And he said, well, you can have it for what it should have been, less the deposit that's already been paid on it. So I got it at a knockdown bargain price. I probably only paid a further £2-3 for it, and never really played it. But Dead Kennedies, I came across them originally because I already had this single, Holiday in Cambodia, on 7-inch. I bought it from a charity shop, and it shares its place rather eclectically with a copy of Candy Staton's Young Hearts Run Free, because these 7-inch vinyl wallets are actually quite hard to come by these days, so I double up most of my singles in them to protect them. But I got this track, I got this 7-inch single, and it's a really good track, Holiday in Cambodia. And they have, again, that kind of homemade sort of feel that we saw on the Ian Dury and the Blockheads LP. Very cheap feeling paper, and very plain in a label on that. But I don't actually recognise any of the tracks that are on this particular album. I had a listen to this whilst I was preparing for this video, and actually it's a very listenable album. The Dead Kennedies were considered being quite edgy in their time. A lot of their tracks are very, very cutting social commentary, and as a result, a lot of places refuse to stock their records. Not just in America, which is normally pretty good at banning records. I mean, they banned Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. I think it was by the Kingsmen, because they thought it had dodgy lyrics. It didn't, but they thought it did. So it actually came as a surprise to me that a lot of places in the UK, they just wouldn't stop this. And again, in keeping with having these standalone singles, there's a single by the Dead Kennedies that actually managed to get to number 36 in the charts around the time this album came out. It's not on this album, but it's called Too Drunk to... yeah, I'm not going to say that word. And apparently it's one of those records. There's a lot of controversy at the BBC and Top of the Pops. What happens if this thing goes to number 1? As it happened, it peaked at number 36, and Tony Blackburn mentions it on an episode of Top of the Pops where he's doing the top 40 Poptastic rundown, only as Too Drunk rather than by its full title. But this is actually quite mellow by a lot of Dead Kennedy standards. Very cutting lyrics, but certainly the quality of the music is very listenable to even now. And it actually surprised me. I'm probably going to listen to this a few more times. Other notable tracks that you might remember from the Dead Kennedys catalogue: Nazi Punks, Off, and that was covered by Napalm Death. I don't have the Dead Kennedys version, but I do actually have the EP by Napalm Death on 7-inch vinyl, and it's well, you know, it's always good for a laugh, but not really one I would have ever played on radio. Although, funnily enough, there's a track on there called Aryanism, I think it's called Aryanism, which is purely instrumental, and I actually used that as a bed track during one of my late night rock shows that I used to do on the radio many years ago. Anyway, I hope that's been informative to you. 3 good albums. Probably apart from, well, I think most people have heard of Dury and the Blockheads, heard of the Specials, but they're the sort of groups that you know for particular tracks rather than albums. And the Dead Kennedies, again, you may have heard the name, but not necessarily be fully aware of some of their back catalogue and some of the controversy. And indeed, controversy with this, there was a big court case in America because of some of the pullouts, actually. I probably should show you some of the insides of these. And as far as I can tell, because there's not really much else in this packaging, it's this, the painting Penis Landscape by H.R. Geiger. Apparently some little kid, teenager, whatever, in America, she bought a copy of this album and her parents were very displeased by this picture. And a court case ensued, and to be honest, it descended into farce. And in the end, it was thrown out of court eventually, but not before several of the band members and indeed the record pressing plant were drawn into it, trying to secure a prosecution for disseminating lewd material. And one of the reasons that the prosecution failed was because the prosecution tried to show just that picture in isolation, and what the judge ruled was you couldn't do that. It was part of a bigger package of everything else, and if you try to show the prosecution that, and to be honest, I can't see anything lewd about that myself, but if you showed the prosecution that on its own, it was misrepresenting the nature of the full package to the jury in an attempt to secure a prosecution which really probably they shouldn't have done. Well, certainly shouldn't have done, and didn't. So there we are, 3 great albums, more underground albums, that are certainly deserving of being added to this top 1000 vinyl records in my collection. And it's nice to have some of these more unusual records that certainly do still hold their own. And certainly I've had a listen to all 3 of these. And punk is not my thing, I said that right back at the start. But even so, these are 3 albums which really I can appreciate, and certainly the Frankenchrist one there, I was quite surprised. I don't think I've ever really properly listened to it. I'm going to go away now and I'm going to listen to that album again in its entirety because it's a really good listenable to album. Anyway, don't forget to like this video, share it too, and subscribe to the channel, and you'll be the first to know about all the great videos that we put on up. We're starting to do a few new things, trying out a bit of a vlog. It's an occasional thing. It did actually really well, the first episode. And hopefully it's going to be a little bit more than a novelty to you all out there. We've got another episode of that to come up, and also don't forget to watch the box opening and review videos. We've got the trains going by videos, and also we started putting up a few road trips there that we've been recording with the action cam, using it as a dash cam, speeding up a bit so you don't have to sit there for the full 2.5 hours that it normally takes to drive from here to Dury. Anyway, until next time, you take very good care of yourself, and this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying bye for now.